we will switch at this moment into English again for another 15 or 20 minutes, and we'll touch upon an area which is growing in Russia, which hasn't been quite as developed as in other countries. This is the professional field of investor relations. This is quite a special professional field, which is somewhere between the very different job areas of public relations and finance and investments. This is why there is no clear job description, no clear picture of a professional who is an ideal investor relations specialist. In the same time, there is professional education available in investor relations. There is an Institute of Investor Relations. There is a certification available. To clarify on this, we invited a senior manager involved in finance in Russia for over 15 years. Yeah, exactly. So for 17 years, actually, Neil Withers, who has been involved in investor relations in prominent local organizations like Promsvязьbank. He was vice president of Vneshekonombank, and has been involved in investor relations from consulting companies, and also Neil Withers as a volunteer. He is president of the CFA Association Russia. I will give the floor to clarify on this.
All of you are either CFAs or I believe have been candidates for writing the CFA exam, which means you all have a reasonable fluency in English. I might recommend that you also try to become fluent in Chinese or Arabic, particularly if you're interested in investor relations in the current geopolitical situation. My own background, in Canada, I started as a macroeconomist, editor of a stock market-oriented journal. I worked then as an analyst for a brokerage firm, and specifically targeting banks. I worked for the Royal Bank of Canada, which is the largest bank, and at that time, we really didn't have investor relations. I was in the financial control, the central sort of financial department, and it was my job to write the financial section of the annual report, along with other things. Because I'd sort of had some time in the brokerage industry, when questions came from investors or from analysts, they sort of got shoved to me. You deal with this and sort of answer their questions. My particular job position, long after I left it, I actually became the vice president of investor relations. I worked in international division and financial capital, the capital of our subsidiary network, etc. I left because I had a bad boss. I went back to the brokerage industry and actually worked as a bank analyst for a couple of years until the market cracked in '87, and I looked around and said, I'm not going to make any money at this. And I went back and worked for another bank who eventually sent me here to Russia, Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce. And here I worked with Возрождение for 11 years. And during that time, we did the first international share issue of a Russian bank in 2006, and again in 2007. So 2007, we were right in the middle between VTB, not Vneshekonombank, but VTB, and Sberbank. Возрождение was a good example. That was really where I became more or less specialized in investor relations, although that wasn't the reason I came over here. It's just that no one else in the bank really understood why we should talk to investors. After all, the dominant shareholder owns the bank, doesn't he? I mean, why do we need to talk to these other only minority investors? Well, they set the price in the market. The dominant shareholder doesn't sell his shares, and therefore he has no effect on the price at which shares are trading in the market. But when the bank needs to sell new shares, it's the market price which determines what level you can do an IPO at. And in 2006, I guess going back in 2005, the shares were trading around $10. In 2006, we sold the first lot of shares at $27, and in 2007 at $54. A lot of that was just what was happening in emerging markets, but much more of it was the long relationship that Vojtěch had speaking to international investors and becoming more open. Openness, transparency is an important part of governance, and it's something that international investors particularly look for. I got so good at it that VTB, who was having some problems, asked me to come and work for them, and I was Senior Vice President of Investor Relations for a couple of years until the fellow who hired me left, and I was regarded as part of his team, so I left. I worked for an investment bank called Silk Route Financial, where we were trying to advise companies in the financial sphere in Central and Eastern Europe and on into Asia. It was not the right time in the market for that. I joined Promsvias when they were trying to do an IPO. Unfortunately, the term that they had set themselves was much too short. They had good relationships with debt investors, and therefore they believed that investors knew them. After all, we deal with Fidelity, we deal with all the big investors, but there's a big difference between debt investors and equity investors. And having done debt issues that Fidelity has bought might get you in the door to the equity side, but it doesn't mean that they already understand you and know and trust you. Promsvias has postponed their IPO quite significantly. I'm now Senior Advisor Russia for STJ Advisors, which is a small boutique. You can think of it as a newer version of Rothschilds. It's a group of very senior people with experience in the market, based in London, very successful actually in the UK, in Scandinavia and in Europe, but we haven't done an awful lot of deals here, and I can't offer any of you a job. I am their only person actually in Moscow full time, and I don't need an assistant at the moment because the international markets are basically closed for Russian debt and equity investors, although I hope that will change, and I hope on two bases. One, personal income would be improved, and secondly, I just think it's important for Russia to have connections with international financial markets, and we're not moving strongly in that direction at the moment.